So I've been looking up some of the worst games for the 3DS recently, and one common trend I noticed caught my eye. A lot of these lists include Power Rangers Megaforce, which is very interesting to me, and since I'm a Power Rangers fan, I'm curious to see if it's true. Is the game really that bad? It doesn't help that Power Rangers Megaforce itself is a pretty controversial season. Power Rangers Megaforce isn't very good. It's probably considered to be one of the worst seasons of all time. And there's many factors at play to why. The writing is pretty bad. I mean, it's Power Rangers, what do you expect? The Wire? I mean, maybe a little, but the producers for this season didn't really care about the story, because, you know, the show's aimed for 10-year-olds, and it gave them an excuse to be really sloppy. Okay, maybe it was always like that, but it was definitely worse here. Another factor that came into play for the writing was also how they handled the Sentai footage. Everyone knows Power Rangers is based on a Japanese show called Super Sentai. Typically, the Sentai would be 50 episodes, and Power Rangers would have episodes around the 40-ish mark, given a lot of room to breathe regarding the footage. When Saban took over the rights, scenes took a different turn, where each adaptation would take 2 seasons to make, 22 episodes each, which really isn't that big of a deal. It's still the same thing, really. The only difference is that it'll take 2 years for it to run. So, say you dislike Ninja Steel, well, too bad, you're gonna have to wait for a long time. But the Megaforce seasons try to play with this a bit. Instead, what it did was adapt 2 different Sentais, Go Seiger and Go Kaiger. This was a pretty bad move, because you have a 50-episode show smushed into 22 episodes. Since Power Rangers is a toy commercial first, it is a must to show the new toys. Which has the odd situation where literally every episode would debut some new Zord or power-up. And since the writing is pretty poor, it's usually like, you got a new Zord because friendship and teamwork or whatever. Thankfully, this changed in Dino Charge, where I feel they put a little more effort in structuring the moral of the day, and done so since then. And there's even the fact that Go Seiger was even used in the first place. Go Kaiger is the anniversary season, which has a lot of merchandising potential. Not saying Go Seiger's bad, but let's be honest, which one is more interesting in comparison? So yeah, Megaforce is a pretty messy season. Some people like it, but it has a lot of flaws. Does that translate to the game itself? Does the game really deserve this much scorn? Megaforce is a beat-em-up side-scroller. Typically, each level will give you some mini side missions, like defeat all the enemies, survive a horde of enemies for a minute, collect all the tokens, very basic stuff. And the levels aren't really that long either. Some levels take place in a city, a jungle, a volcano, and that's pretty much it. You play 5 episodes, quote unquote, that consists of a batch of 6 missions. You're allowed to rotate amongst the 5 rangers, which can be very fortunate if you're low on health. If you're dying, well, just switch to somebody else. One thing I will praise about this game, that they give each ranger a fair amount of difference. Troy and Gia are fairly decent melee attackers. Jake is fairly strong too, but his weapon comes off more bulky. I guess it does more damage, but I prefer the other two. Noah has his blaster or crossbow as his weapon, which can be useful in some circumstances, but the melee ones are way more efficient. Although I guess it's more based on preference, I guess. But Emma is very odd. Unlike Noah, she doesn't shoot with the attack button. Pressing the action button allows her to do awkward kicks. So you have to press another button for her to shoot, which kinda ruins the flow because you can't lazily mash the same button. And what's her weapon anyways? A shield gun? And unlike the other characters, she's also the highest jumper. None of these other characters have abilities like that. So yeah, I prefer Troy. His weapon's a little more effective, mostly for having a longer range. And sometimes when certain missions come out, they force you to use a certain character, so sometimes you're forced to play as characters you may not like. Oh yeah, you also have this power-up form, which I usually activate by accident. And this sounds pretty diverse, right? Well, not exactly. The game itself is quite boring and dull. The levels aren't even all that interesting to keep your attention. The only thing I could say that's out of the ordinary is that the jungle missions are really annoying, because the mud damages you, and that's pretty much it. Once you play one episode, you play them all. Also, the game can be really annoying too. The characters talk non-stop, and it's all repeating the same dialogue. Usually when this stuff happens in games, it's pretty charming, right? But here it's so grating. Remember in Kingdom Hearts 3, where Donald and Goofy will get super annoying anytime you're near ingredients or a lucky emblem? It's amped up to 11 here. Anytime you are remotely near a box that you could destroy, the character will let you know. Take this part for instance. The characters will tell you to smash a wall. And oh boy, do they tell you. You mean this wall, right? Well, I guess not. It's not until you go to the other side of the platform that you actually see it. And actually doing what they tell you doesn't work for some reason. At the end of each episode, you do a Zord battle. It's all meant to be really complicated with entirely different controls. You're supposed to hit them at the right time, like when they're charging for their attacks. But I just started blasting and it worked for me. But what about the story? I mean, who cares? Look, other than a few exceptions, the Neo Saban era is usually pretty lame when it comes to villains. And none of them are present here. There is one monster called No Joke. Yeah, so I do appreciate the anime visual novel style, I guess. Only because I like mixing real life pictures and video in games. Guilty pleasure. And while I'm at it, I actually am glad the actual actors are playing their characters in this game. I just find the use of them really annoying. In some of the later levels, you are allowed to play as Robo Knight, who is actually one of the better characters from the season. His playstyle is a mix of shooting and melee. And unlike playing as the Rangers, he only has Ghost Sight by his side, so the dialogue really isn't that intrusive. Usually. The last episode all takes place in the same ice level. Yeah, even in the later game, there's really not that much to say. I will say, if anything, the final boss presents some challenge unlike the rest. And I actually died. But then I just started blasting right from the start, so it became no issue. Now, unlike the Donald Thunder game, there's some more things to do to 100% it. But honestly, I don't want to play this game any more than I need to. It's really such a slog to get through. And even though I praise certain elements from this game, the meat of it is really boring. At least the Donald Thunder one was a little more fun. It's like when you're presented with a movie that's so bad it's good. It's good just for how bad it is. But then you have a bad movie that's so boring, and it lacks that enjoyment and becomes even worse. Although I do get an impression that the only reason this game is on these lists is solely because it's a licensed Power Rangers game. And I think I put more effort than the people creating the articles. The worst crime for this game is being very generic. So, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want, you can see some of my other content. So if you want, you can watch that too. Hope to see you soon.